every day that I sit down to do my work, I'm thinking, is there something new that I have to look up that just got announced that's going to totally revolutionize how I do my day?
It's funny that everything is agentic nowadays, and then what you really need in the team is high agency people that are comfortable, like out of their comfort zone, and then there's this new tool that's potentially helpful for the company's workflow, and then new value to be created in certain ways.
Hey everyone, welcome to Tycoon Talks, our monthly series where we dive into the latest trends, tools, and ideas shaping the data world. At Database Tycoon, our mission is to put data power back in the hands of teams, and this show is all about sharing the conversations that help make that happen. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by CL Kao, the founder of Reiki. CL has been building groundbreaking tools and communities for years, from creating SVK, a version control system that even Apple used, to co-founding Gov, the civic tech movement in Taiwan that brought open collaboration into government. In this episode, we're going to talk about open source infrastructure, collaboration, and what it takes to build tools that truly empower communities. So, to kick things off, CL, what led you from SVK to Gov to infuse AI and then to Reiki? Like, kind of maybe give us like a little like trajectory of how you ended up here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the kind words. And then I grew up as a competitive programmer, and then doing like algorithms and like very deep like data structure, and then for the competition. And then I got into open source when working with some web stuff. So was a very early contributor to the Apache web server. And then so most of the thing you mentioned that I built out were actually um, born out of like frustration, right? So the control system, SVK, probably nobody heard of it nowadays. So it was at a time that it's 2 year prior to Git, and then the main open source collaboration is done through a very old version control system called CVS, and it's very centralized, and then it doesn't allow like developer, if you're just a contributor to an open source project, to work effectively, as in branching and merging. Um, so I was a committer on another version control system called Subversion, which is pioneered by a bunch of great engineers. And then, but they were building out that version control system still centralized, as in like you have to connect to a central server. And then that's still frustrating to me because I like to travel around and then work offline. And then so I built a layer on top of that to make it possible to collaborate without a central server. So it's very similar to what Git eventually like brought to the world today. And then at that time, it wasn't really commercializing that. So it was just like open source project, we work with the like contributor from around the world, and then eventually like Apple adopted it, and then for a very long time actually macOS 10 shipped with SVK in it, and then until recently they I think the WebKit also was still using SVK till a couple of years ago. So that kind of let me have this realization about if you change the way that people collaborate through tools, like inventing a new concept, like for example, for Git was really like you can or when we say for GitHub, you can do pull requests that somebody you don't know can send you something that's almost ready to merge, right? So that kind of changed how like modern software development worked. And then so that got me really inspired about, okay, if we change the way or provide a new tool for people to collaborate, then magic happens. And then a couple years after that, I started the GovZero community in Taiwan, also out of frustration because the government was like telling the citizen, well, this economy things are very complicated. You, the citizen, don't really need to know the details. And then that was like a lot of people like were furious about that. So I was thinking, okay, what else can we do about this? Like, can we process a bunch of open data and then show the government or show the general public that we can actually participate in meaningful democratic discussion? So that started out like visualizing the government budget, visualizing the legislation process, and then that got me into working with a lot of messy data. And then there was like also that frustration about working with data, the developer experience has always been really brittle. You always try a little bit of data and then run some command line tools, and then eventually like work on larger data set. And then that cycle, it's just like doesn't feel right. And so GovZero was like 2012, and it's still going. It's like hundreds of projects, like a community operate in a kind of open source collaboration model. Did like campaign finance disclosure and all that, and then it had a healthy relationship with the government, like we're trying to fork the government and then patch the government about how you should release public data and then empower citizens to participate in the in the discourse of like policy and everything. So fast forward 2018, I started the previous company, Infuse AI, trying to improve that collaboration between like data scientists and machine learning engineers, that how they productionize machine learning models. And then so at that time was the previous like deep learning boom, where people started to realize, oh, the machine learning model are now really capable of doing things, and then how do we like productionizing that? So it's part of the ML ops ecosystem at that time, and then the platform was essentially a multiplayer kind of Jupyter notebook and then other orchestration tool, and then it was used by some of the largest company in the world, and then major banks in Taiwan, and then so that was a previous venture, and then got me to think, okay, the entire ML ops cycle is very long, and then if we are to narrow down somewhere that's more impactful, it's got to be data, because at that time, like foundation model is almost happening, and then every company is gonna have their competitive advantage based on the data they have, based on how well they can prepare this data to be used by AI. And then so Recce born out of that being a way that we think that's missing in the current data development experience, where like a lot of the efforts in the ecosystem industries of trying to apply software engineering practice to that, like being code first, being able to do code review and so on. But there's like something missing there, and then we wanted to address this by providing a way that the data context problem is surfaced between the developer and the stakeholder. But we can get into that a bit later.
Kind of what I was like moving into here, which you kind of already touched upon. Like, what problem does Reiki aim to solve in data infrastructure today? And how did your open source philosophy shape Reiki's design? You want to dive a little deeper into that?
Yeah, of course. The progression that we see from the big data era to nowadays so-called modern or postmodern data infrastructure or data stack is that it used to be that in the big data era, you process huge amount of data, but with pretty much like pretty static like logic. You don't often change the way you process that because it's already printing money, right? And then, but what the trend we see today is that smaller companies, smaller data set are moving faster, like integrating new types of data, extracting values from data in different ways. So people really see data as like the data stack as something to be actively developed on, rather than just a one-off thing that this fixed logic can stay there for 5 years. So in that kind of change, we have to really treat the data infrastructure as something with a better developer experience. By that, I mean that the way you propose change, you review change, you collaborate with those who are impacted by the change, which is probably someone who consumed the downstream data, or that automation that depends on those data need to be like brought into the loop. And then, so what we're trying to solve is really like having a way to represent what correctness mean for data. And then you might wonder that there are like data testing tool, or like, for example, DBT test or unit test. And then that usually test the shape of the data, or some boundary of the data, even like referential integrity. But really the semantics of the data often is like ill defined when they are brought into like engineers who actually work on the data. And then the stakeholder needs to actually see the result to determine if that data represent what they meant. So essentially what Recce is trying to achieve is creating an abstraction of what correctness means when correctness is kind of like ephemeral or subjective. And then so we surface that contextual problem to the team to work on data.
I just wanted to say that I'm really interested in the journey you've taken to get to this point, because I can relate to what you said earlier about sort of following pain points and using that to guide you to solve problems. I think it's interesting that over time, some of your organizations have been involved in politics, getting directly involved with, you know, sharing opinions and gathering people together. And more recently, you're working on Recce, which is focused on identifying data diffs between production and development environments. And I think that it really touches on the fact that fundamental issues like this have really not been solved yet in the data industry. And there are plenty of teams out there who are assuming that as long as my DBT model builds, then everything's going to be correct downstream. And I want to latch onto one other term you said about defining the language of truth, because you can have one person say that a data model works, but they just mean that it compiles. They don't necessarily mean it's working all the way through. So I just want to maybe expand on the first question and just say, with all of these organizations that you've been involved with, how do you determine where to put your effort? I know you're probably working on a lot, and then why is now the right moment for Recce?
So that's a great question. And then like when I think about how we frame this conversation, actually, you know what, the thing that threaded everything together is the concept of diff. So version control system, of course, show you diff, right? And then the important part is that diff essentially reduce that cognitive overload about like how you comprehend a change. And then in GovZero, one of the things I worked on is legislation process, and then patching the law. Like when there's a proposed bill, it is also a diff to the current legislation, right? So we actually visualize that. So when Taiwan has one of the first legalized same-sex marriage in Taiwan, that we have a diff about how this civil code will change about allowing that marriage. So it is very interesting that, because when you say where to put the effort, and then of course a common framework is like the OODA is like observe, orientate, and then decide and act, right? And then diff really help us to orientate a lot, because you consume much fewer information that is required for you to decide what to do next. Right. So for Recce, it's essentially the same things, like production and your development environment. How are things changing? But the challenge here is really diff for data is a lot. And then comprehending that might be harder than trying to figure out if the code logic change means what you mean. Right. But it's not sufficient to just look at the code changes. So what we come up with Recce is, the idea for Recce is that through a couple of techniques like very granular color level lineage impact analysis, we can narrow down that diff that's really meaningful to this context. And then for the author who is already trying to do things and having kind of the context in the brain, how does it use a diff to surface that context, as in why I think my change is correct according to my understanding. So by reducing that cognitive overload for how I intended my change to appear and then present it to the stakeholder, that reduced that communication overhead. Maybe this didn't really answer your question about how I think about what's important to work on. For me, it's really what's your kind of biggest pain right now, and then you want to kind of divert your energy to solve that. And then I don't think it's a lot of times really the gut feeling that you feel that this is the thing you want to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could definitely pick up on a common thread here, which is that everything to some extent boils down to making changes, advocating for them, and communicating
Yeah.
the effects of those changes. And whether it's data or policy or any number of other things, there are lessons we can probably all learn from those fields and share them. Chloe, I'll tag you back in. Do you have another question you want to ask?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit into kind of the broader sense of open source and community building. So first, I would say for the both of you, kind of like how do you see the role of open source in breaking down proprietary monopolies?
Um, so the commercialization of open source has taken different forms in the past, like I guess 3 4 decades, right? And the first is really like hobbies making something that other people also want, and then you may like sell services like what Red Hat did to like commercialize Linux distributions. And then there are times that when SaaS was like prominent, and then you have hosted open source, and for example like MongoDB at the time, and then I guess there are other like strategies that people adopted, that open source being a way of awareness or creating standard, and then for the commercial part you sell something that's kind of complementary to that. So there are like various ways that this is being like worked on, and very successful company went public on that. But from in the context of what we're doing, that if we're thinking about changing behavior, creating a new standard, creating like a new workflow, just if we go back like 20 years, then like the way decentralized version control system work is just kind of super weird, right? If you're a company, then you probably want your code like centralized somewhere, and then have a like a well-defined current version and a previous version, and then that decentralized notion kind of blew people's mind about like, why do I want like different heads, and then of the potential version of the next version of source code, and then how do you merge them together? If we're changing behavior, and then proprietary system has a harder start to get people convinced about like this is the right way, this is the new way to do things. And you can see this but proprietary software is definitely still valuable. You can see like Snowflake kind of pioneer this kind of separation of compute and storage for data analytics, right? And then the technology is there, and then but they packaged it in a way that really performed, and then the team really like it. And then a couple of years later, you see like open tables, and then Iceberg. Like you can build something similar to that architecture with open source as well. And then so I feel that like there are different times where different models work better for the industrial adoption. What are your thoughts, Stephen?
Yeah, I broadly agree with the last piece. I don't think that um, there's one right way or wrong way. I mean, I think there's a place for open source and closed source, of course, and they serve different needs. Um, I just think that we live in a time when there's so much great open source software available now that anyone who wants to experiment or wants to start working with data, the barriers are dropping quite a lot. So what I think, and I kind of want to use this as a segue to ask you about your, I know you have Recce Cloud now, that's newly released. I want to give you a chance to chat about that. But I think that the companies that I've seen do this best are the ones that provide a helpful, useful open source offering, and then can also provide a cloud offering that goes with it that complements it well. And, I think when I think about recommending open source versus cloud for anything, of course, it's tempting to just ask a team to deploy something open source, but there are a lot of trade-offs you make when you make that choice. And sometimes, very often, it's just easier to give someone a web page they could just log into, and that's really what they're looking for. So my thoughts are try open source if you can, but don't, be afraid to upgrade if you have to.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly. And then I think the point is really like in different I mean from like a vendor perspective, this is kind of adoption steps, right? And then but from a user perspective, it's again it's the value you get from the piece of software. And then the open source is kind of like your investment is your time, and then figuring out kind of how to uh like integrate everything together. And then at a time that this is adopted by a team, it probably makes sense for a cloud version if it's creating value for the team. So that's I think like how like most of the open source success story works. Like you at the end of the day, it's still like the commercial offering is like attractive to the team.
And that kind of segues into my next question, kind of going deeper into like how do you balance like what is the balance between creating like a sustainable business model, right? Because we obviously all need to, you know, generate a profit. And how do we like, balance that with also trying to, provide community driven open source?
Yeah. So this is always a thing that a company has to always like trying to balance, of course. And then you see like stories like Docker where they have this developer love but having hard time monetizing for a long time, and then until they decided, oh, we are gonna just charge for the desktop, and then for a company that are sufficiently large with like large revenue that and then it worked out for them, right? So there's no like set rule for how like at the end like what successful model works. And then but like what I believe in is like if we're creating a new concept, new abstraction for the entire industry, that part has to be like open source or open standard at least. So the adoption is actually the change driver that we wanted to shift everyone's behavior that care about like making sure things are correct, right? And then you might be surprised to learn that when the pull request hasn't existed like on GitHub, right? And then every CI/CD kind of concept or DevOps concept is only a best practice. People follow this step by step rather than productize that into something like Circle CI or like GitHub Action that can allow you to do like actual like DevOps, right? So I think we are at a similar stage where for the data developer experience, there are a lot of great best practices and then a lot of like different tools you can assemble, like SimCI or like zero copy cloning, and then creating environment, creating mock data. So these are all kind of like best practices, and then piece by piece, right? So until there is like a good open standard and abstraction, that we can't really productize that. So the goal here is that that part needs to be open source, that we have uh, a abstraction and a tool set around that creates great adoption, that people really find value. It's like, okay, this is like so little effort, and then making sure things are correct. Why am I not doing that? This a no-brainer that everyone should be having that practice. And then so the surrounding ecosystem, like for example, Recce Cloud, or maybe there's another company doing similar things, will emerge as something that like nowadays you shop like different CI/CD tool, either Circle CI harness or like everything. This become like like a choice of like different provider for providing that value.
yeah, I just want to comment on that. I'm thinking about DBT as another example of an open source tool that, obviously it became quite popular very quickly, and then they had to, make that similar choice of, productizing it and monetizing it, and now they have DBT Cloud, and that's been a, successful product as well. But I think to your point, part of what was so exciting about DBT when it came out was that it was creating a new abstraction that more or less was not there before, or had not been polished to the level that DBT had brought it to. And I think that as exciting as that was, and of course looking back now, I think we can all agree that that revolutionized the industry. There was a learning curve at the time, and I think that if they had come out of the gate with a strong, or I should say, if they started with a proprietary product, I don't think they would have gotten the adoption that they got because it was open source. And I think that, you know, a sales process that's led first by open source tooling to build engagement and then, or user base, I should say, community, and then following it up with like a tool like that, like dbt cloud, that, can say, we hear you and we're glad you're using the open source tool. If you're interested in, running this somewhere else or getting some extra features, hopefully, it's a natural evolution for them. So, and I hope the same ends up being true with you as well.
Yeah, thanks, and I absolutely agree. And then like if it weren't like DBT weren't like open source, it's very hard to achieve that adoption about becoming a standard. And oftentimes like innovation like really start with a core like new concept or new abstraction, and then for them it's really like template this SQL organized in a way that represents a tag, right? This is like a super simple concept when you say it that way. And then you might even pick on that. It's like, why are you templating SQL? This is awful, or templating YAML, right? And then, but it didn't matter. And then because it is a abstraction that was missing in the industry that we all need. And then so looking back to that, I think that's really awesome. And then help the industry tremendously.
And then kind of pivoting directions a little bit. So I want to kind of talk about the state of data infrastructure
Mhm.
as a whole right now. So I guess first, like for the both of you, where do you see opportunities for small, medium teams versus enterprise players?
So when I think about that, that's really this is the we gotta remember right now, 2025 is the most normal time. It's gonna be like even more weird with AI. And then people can now build a lot with like very little efforts. And then so what does it mean for data? And I think there's still a little bit of gap. I actually wrote a post like almost a year ago now. It's like when like Copilot and kind of all those code completion tool are already helping software developers. Uh, Not to mention like Cursor or Claude Code. It's like just the code completion was so helpful for software developer. For data, we haven't seen that much at a time. Mostly because that we have a longer cognitive load or cognitive loop that we have to kind of interpret the result of the AI recommended changes. And then for data system, that is the impact of the data. And then you can't really kind of use your brain to predict, okay, what this one line change is going to produce. So that made that loop, like the feedback loop, much longer so that the code completion agent wasn't able to help that. But now I think things have changed a lot. And then there are like new research. And then, okay, so if database is mostly serving agentic workflow, and then what do we need to optimize the database for? Are there like intermediate modeling that should be done within the database when it's trying to answer 100 similar questions from the agents, right? So there are like interesting new opportunity about like how the data system is now changed, that if a lot of the interaction from the data system, either it's read only or read write, is coming from agents. And there's like a lot of things that can be done here, like guardrailing and then like optimization, and then but at the end of the day, it's really like answering the right business questions. Like I talked to a friend who's at a small company, like about 50 people, with like over 1 million like monthly like OpenAI or Claude like API spend. It's like tremendously successful startup, and then they don't have like a data team. And then what I enable is NCP to their Snowflake, and then like from there, people from different departments are able to get some answers to their question, but more importantly, they collect what actual questions people are asking. And from there, you can like when we say begin with the end, like these are the end goal for what we need to answer from this data. So previously, I think data team building out is a relatively large investment for teams, and then you usually think about, okay, how do we model everything perfectly so we can anticipate all this ad hoc question, and then everyone can self-serve. And then it's kind of been going around for a couple of years, and then people realize, oh no, it's really like it's a lot of upfront investment, and then it doesn't necessarily answer all these questions, right? So when we think about beginning with the ends, like, okay, what are the questions that really need to be answered? And then we build out kind of the core models answering that. And then it changes the way that you see like building out a data team as a large upfront investment versus something that's more achievable. Maybe the agents aren't doing the good job in the beginning, but gradually when we model things out, when we clarify the context, it's better. So the opportunity we see is that smaller team will be able to like afford building out more like complete data infra, I guess in the foreseeable future.
I just have a quick thought on this as well. I think that the biggest opportunity that I'm finding right now, especially when you compare small businesses and large enterprises, is that the small players are starting to realize that you don't need you don't need to be a big company to have good data anymore. You know, the tools, the wide variety of tools that are available, um, means that a small business can use the same Snowflake instance that like a big bank might be using and get access to the same tools that they'd be using. And I went to a conference last week that was attended by a lot of retailers and e-commerce brands and stuff, and that was a common theme I was hearing, that the small teams want, they want agentic stuff too, and they want all the bells and whistles that you might typically in previous decades, like think about having a whole big Microsoft setup of a warehouse. That's all changing now. So I think what I try to do with my consulting, and frankly where I think tools like Recce are going to be helpful in making this case, is that proving to teams that you really can get started and you can get very good pipelines. You can build great stuff with these tools, and you don't necessarily have to spend as much as you might think that a big company would have to. And it's finding that blend, like we spoke about, of which tools are you going to use that are open source and which ones are you going to pay for, and where do you draw the line, and how do you make those choices?
Yeah, definitely. And then we see this similar trajectory in any kind of step function technology innovation, right? So like going back to like version control and kind of even Slack is something, a common communication infrastructure that is nowadays kind of take it for granted. But in the old times, you probably have someone setting up an internal IRC server and then like enabling like globally distributed computation for your company. And then so like nowadays, like if you're not a technology company, you can just use Slack for working with a global remote team. So this is, I think, it's a recurring thing about like all this thing that used to be only very sophisticated team are able to do is now more accessible.
Yeah, totally agree.
And then pivoting to kind of our final section, one of the final sections. Yeah, you brought up a good point that 2025 is going to be like, from where we're standing, we're actually in like the most normal time, which I say, I think, it really puts things into perspective. And so I guess for the both of you, like, how should companies prepare for shifts in tooling and infrastructure in the next 5 to 10 years?
What about the
Um,
next 5 to 10 months?
Yeah, whatever you think the future is, the future could be tomorrow. It could be in the next 5 hours.
I mean, maybe I'll just jump in with a quick thought on this. My approach to this has just been to try to follow along with what's been released. I think that more so now than ever before, technology is being released and updated at an incredibly rapid pace. And, in addition to this being the last maybe normal year, I think it's going to probably be the slowest year of technology progression from this
Uh,
point on. I mean,
Yeah.
just following Moore's law and all that. So, my advice for what it's worth, is to just keep thinking about your workflows, keep thinking about the things you maybe take for granted or have never questioned in the work you do, and think about how can these tools help. I know that's kind of a vague example, but one that I can give is that I've been doing a lot more dictation in my daily life. Instead of spending time writing things out, I find that I just reach to narrate things and I can get content created much faster. And now with AI tools, I can ask it to polish what I've written without having it try to, you know, emulate me or, try to figure out what my voice is. But it's a simple way that I've managed to save tons of time that I would have spent before. So those are my thoughts. Like it's going to be hard to say exactly what's happening in the future, but every day that I sit down to do my work, I'm thinking, is there something new that I have to look up that just got announced that's going to totally revolutionize how I do my day? But
Yeah.
CL, what are your thoughts?
So for a company preparing for the shift in tooling infrastructure, I feel it's like Steven says, it's more the mindset, and then what I feel is that it's funny that everything is uh, with agentic nowadays, and then what you really need in the team is high agency people that are comfortable, like out of their comfort zone, and then there's this new tool that's potentially helpful for the company's workflow, and then new value to be created in certain ways, and then at the end of the day, I think companies are like the people in the company that make things happen. So like there's gonna be more like tools coming. There's gonna be more innovation coming, but like what really matters is really having the people who can turn that into something useful for the company, right? And then like that's why like working with like great people and then like high agency people who can adopt things like fast and then course correct for ourselves and the company is the most crucial thing.
What is next for Reiki? What is on the horizon?
Yeah, so we are launching a lot of new things like the cloud and then AI assisted validation, and then we actually seen really good initial result that's better than what we expected, and then so working with a couple of design partners that polishing that before it's generally available. At the end of the day, that I think earlier we mentioned about the coding agent has not been super helpful for real agentic data workflow. And then for Recce, where we are coming in this at a validation layer, is really helping the agent eventually to communicate with the humans that, hey, I made this change, and then I think you can validate this, my change is correct through this. And then that was really surfacing the most crucial choke point for like human in the loop to decide whether that automated modeling or how we are now making changes to our data stack is acceptable to human. And then so that's where we see that underlying technology like maturing, and then user expectation is aligning that this is going to be the workflow that they want. So I think that's a super great opportunity and for our company and the whole industry. So I'm super excited to it.
And now we have our Q&A. Does anybody here have questions for Stephen or CL?
How do y'all see the future of collaboration in this space? More teams are adding AI agents, but at the same time, we're having people get access to data that haven't had access before. So where do you see either this converging or growing into?
Yeah, that's a great question. I the first phrase that comes to my mind is just more important. I think it's going to be more important than it's ever been before. I don't know from a technology perspective what form that's going to take. I feel like every tool that I use is now adding some form of AI and MCP, and they're all figuring out how they want to chat with each other. And I think, if we give it a few months, we'll probably see some common patterns emerge amongst teams. I'm certainly trying to like figure some of those out myself, and seeing some successes and some failures there. But I think what's most important is that we're at a point where the software can answer a lot of our questions, a lot more than it used to be able to, and that means that a lot of new information will get brought out, and it's going to be more important than ever for people to be constantly validating what they hear, constantly, checking, is this model connected to the right source? There's going to be a new level of collaboration that maybe never had to happen before that does need to happen now. But CL, I'm curious what you think about this.
I think the collaboration would happen earlier in the process of making change. So right now, if we use the kind of waterfall analogy from traditional software development, the data is similar to that, right? At the end, like someone figure out, oh, this is not what I meant, and then so how do we surface that like misalignment earlier? And then in software development, this is like, okay, pretty standard, like agile, you release early, release often. But like the data workflow that is commonly observed is like you work on something really hard and then show the result at the end, and then you have to revise it maybe. And then so by tearing down that workflow a little bit and then like reassemble, but it has to be something that the actor feel like this is less effort and then more effective, right? So I think that's where like AI is super helpful, like coming in early and then enabling that context for collaboration.
And then Jason or Dory, do you have any other questions?
What's the hottest take you have?
You want to take that one first, CL?
Okay, so this is something maybe somewhat weird. This is going back to my days working on version control system, and then version control system is essentially like several versions of directories organized in a way that you can access, you can look into. And then what Git innovated is something called content addressable storage. That means that each version is a hash result of the message of the commit and then the tree content and the previous tree. So if you think about that, that's super smart because you can compute this hash really fast, and then it's immutable because it's like a blockchain. So blockchain is a similar concept, miracle chain, right? And then when you think about it this way, and then all this potentially written software is can be represented in a hash that might already existed. Right. So what we're doing is really uncovering that what's to be written, and then maybe that's kind of your passion that you wanted to achieve that is destined to happen for that commit specifically at that time. Right. So if you think about it this way, the world is kind of super weird if you take out the time dimension and then look it in a kind of I don't know, higher dimension that everything existed, and then but we are here to make it happen.
Sort of a tech determinism kind of thing? Or...
No, it's not so determinism. It's like it is, everything is kind of bound to happen, but you still get to decide, like, here's what I want to do. Here's like I'm gonna make it happen.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Interesting. Yeah. For me, I think maybe my hottest take right now is that I think I, again, it's a hot take, but I think we're heading into a big SaaS centralization here. I think that especially with AI becoming quickly the most popular tool to run on cloud, I mean, like all the AI companies are scooping up, as much cloud compute space. I have a feeling we're about to see cloud costs increase. And if that happens, I think we'll see stronger incentives for folks to be running more open source code in their own environments. But to be determined. I think it's going to be an interesting next few months to see what happens in this field.
And yeah, when you mentioned like SaaS consolidation, and then there's also this new wave of like personal software, right? People can like just create tailor-made software by themselves and then host it somewhere, and then that kind of work for their scenario. And then this is like super interesting trend where people just build niche software for themselves.
And we have hit the end of our show. Thank you, CL, so much for joining us. I think this was my favorite one. I think I really liked this conversation. And so, where can listeners learn more about Reiki and connect with you? Where is the best place? Where are your socials?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, search for CL Kao, and then you can find out more about Reiki at reikihq.com. There are like demos and then GitHub you can look at, and then once it installed away, if you uh, open a pull request to GitHub, you can immediately use that to see kind of the column level impact, and then explore data differences, and then help you with that pull request.
Amazing.
Cool.
And for those of you tuning in who will be at Coalesce, we are co-hosting a happy hour with Reiki in Vegas. So I will also in the YouTube link, there will be like a link to join. And yeah, and then we'll also be at Small Data SF in November, the both of us, if you guys will be around. Thank you again, CL, for joining, and thank you, Stephen. That concludes this episode of Tycoon Talks. And if you guys are interested in learning more about Database Tycoon, and if you are in need of some data services, we have this cool new quiz on our website called the Data Maturity Quiz. So you can really like figure out kind of like what issues you're having with data and like maybe how we can help. So the link to our website and to take our data maturity quiz and to book a complimentary therapy session will be linked in the description of this video. Thank you guys again. Bye.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.